Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's going to be a wild ride.
What about, would you also say, because I also felt like it wasn't just like, look, there was some European teams who went to CPLs that weren't that good, or they were just all right, and as you say, you've beaten some of them, you've even beaten some of the best players. But the actual, like, super-duper really good elite players from Europe, give me a sense, how good were they?
Yeah, I mean, same level as like Rambo or Kyle, but just in a different way. I mean, their aim was quick. They had really stable aim, crosshair placement. I remember because we would at that CPL we played a lot of teams in the BYOC. We would just run and play speedball, or we'd play some kind of aim map or something like that. And it's just a different style. You're just not used. They're just aggressive. They try to run you over. They attack you. They're not scared to peek. And it's always consistent. It's always going to be the same way. Like the first bullet accuracy of a European player, I felt like at the time was just way better than anything you experienced.
Who was the craziest player do you think you played? Who's the one that really shocked you or impressed you?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. I mean, Elements, and when we played Eolithic, Elements was like really good. I mean, when I watched him play, I mean, he's just a little kid. I mean, you always see these kids, and they're just wrecking people.
Yeah. In some ways, that's actually sort of cooler, though, because like, if someone actually looked like Heat, like a big guy, well, in your brain, you think he should be good. But you're right, if it's like a media or element, like they basically literally look like the nerd from science class, but they're just wrecking everyone, like genius in them all over. I remember,
Yeah, Heaton was another crazy one. I remember he played some team he played. I think it was Infinity 4K or Infinity. It was a UK team, 4K Infinity Esports. I can't remember the name. He played them on Aztec.
Yeah, it's the famous 1v5 round. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 1v5, and I'm just like, it's just stone cold blooded. Like, it probably helps that when the European teams were just better than the average American team. Like every European team was probably, Cal Invite level versus people in Cal Invite weren't Cal Invite level. There were like maybe 5 or 6 of them, and they just consistently played really good teams. And yeah, he was ice cold. I saw Potty on LAN. He was ice cold. I didn't get to play him like other than when he played on Eyeballers, when we played at Babbage's CPL. But they're just really good. And they knew the rules too. I remember Syndicate lost to Eyeballers because at the time, like I said, it was, I think you either get to a certain amount of rounds or you play for 30 or 45 minutes. They had won enough rounds on CT that they just camped. I think they camped the roof.
Right. They could run the timeout. Right.
They could run the timeout. So it forced us at CTs, we couldn't just hold the bomb site and we had to come to them, and they camped the roof. They knew rules, they knew everything, and they were just ahead sometimes on specific things. Like I remember they were using config commands, update rate, command rate, that stuff was popular. They just knew about it before we did. We would just turn on Counter-Strike and change sensitivity, and then we would play. They just knew things we didn't know at the time. And then when they come over to a CPL, we'd learn about them. So I think that also made them put an aura on them as well, right? Because I remember at that CPL in 2000, the Winter CPL that X3 played at, they told everybody they couldn't use update rates. Everybody had to play default. Yeah. And it was a massive deal. Yeah. And the funny thing is I did not use rates because I thought it was like cheating. So, and I had said, if they get rid of these rates, you're going to be stuck. You're just not going to be able to play well. And everybody had to turn back and not play. And I only played one game for X3 at that CPL. It was only because Rambo's mouse just wouldn't work.
Oh, right.
And they just had to start the game on cobble. So I just played. And they're like, oh, you got to change your rates. I'm like, I play default. Like, it's not going to bother me. I'm just going to play. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the European players, they just know stuff we didn't know because they were just more dedicated to the game. I mean, there was another player I remember. He was on Team 9, AHL.
Oh, sure.
That dude was like insane. We played a bunch of scrims with them before we played in the tournament, and I felt like I shouldn't have played them because they just wrecked us.
Oh, it killed your confidence.
The prominent guy that wrecked us. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
Since you referenced some old school names, it's actually cool that you remember, because I have to be careful because people just don't remember names. Obviously you remember triGGa. If people don't remember, triGGa and his brother were DOP players, and famously, I remember this detail. I have an insane memory. They were players that had ridiculously high sensitivity. Do you remember this? You remember this back in the day? CS was the game, obviously, where everyone uses the big mouse pad. They were doing the quick shit where their mouse just goes like that, like the wrist's just like that, isn't it? It's like we're not exaggerating, like an impossible sensitivity, right?
100%, not exaggerating. I remember he used the Razer boom slang with like 1600 DPI and like 15 sensitivity, and like he could move it. And I'm like, this is unplayable, Trig. It's unplayable. And that's why you never saw Scarface or Trig. You never saw them pick up an op. Not one time you will see them. They probably don't even have an op kill. They probably look at the stats and they don't have an op kill.
They were surprisingly good players, though, considering they're using this sensitivity. They could kill people.
triGGa was just triGGa's just insane. It's just insane. I don't understand how anybody with that kind of sensitivity could play. And they were like the best players on the team. And I'm just like, I don't understand. I remember we played them in the earlier CPLs. We played them in the finals of the CPL before Babbage's. And I remember this in my mind because it just cracked me up. And I always mess with them about this is they would always go outside on nuke. And I would always have an op. And every time they came outside, I would kill them. And there was one round, because back then we didn't have a tournament area before the big CPLs. You would have a line of computers on one side and a line on the other side. So you would be looking at who you were playing. And I remember they would just, Scarface just called the strat. His brother is like, yeah, go outside, Trig. And he's like, F that. You go outside. and that was the downside of them, because they were brothers. They would rag on each other all the time. They were so hard on each other. But super cool guys. Yeah, they're pretty local too. So yeah, Trig just cracked me up. But yeah, the sensitivity, 100%. Worse than simple. Simple plays with high sensitivity was probably 2x that.
By the way, one of the things that I always thought was quite interesting was a lot of people from the beginning days we're talking about actually only did like a year or two, and a lot of them bailed, especially when things became more professional. I saw, maybe because you were local, even towards the end, even people won't find these on the wikis. You still used to go to some of the CPLs even when you weren't really playing that on. Were you just playing off and on and you just go to the lands? What was that like?
Yeah, the CPL with Razzle and Jaden was the last one where it was like professional, that was like the retirement event. And afterwards, I went to the CPL after that. We got knocked out on the first round, but we took just friends. The original RS team that played the old schoolers, we took them. But we would just go because we played games. I just liked going, and I knew everybody there. It's when you're in Counter-Strike, the scene, and you've been in it for so long, all your friends are, pretty much from Counter-Strike. I know almost every single guy that I played with
to hang out
on RS. Yeah, it's just a cool event. Even when I went to DreamHack, IEM Dallas
more recently,
the Stewie event, right? I took my kids there to watch it, and then I met a lot of people that had gone before that had played at events, right? I met a guy who said, "Yeah, I'm talking to Kyle on Discord." I'm like, "Hey, just message him and call him a scrub or something. Tell him I'm here." So yeah, it's cool to go to an event, and I just went. It was close. It's 20-30 minutes from my house. The Hyatt hotel that we played most of the lands at. 20 minutes from my house. The Pre-CPL bootcamp, which is usually at Killer Land or Lethal Gamers, that was 10 minutes from my house. So I would just go and either watch or, play with some friends.
By the way, that's actually also one of the things that never used to be very publicised. I know Gottfrag used to eventually show the results of that Pre-CPL Lethal Gamers LAN, which if people don't know is a LAN centre that's really close by and was also one of the original places that had the monthly LANs way back in the day. Yeah. And famously, a lot of the Europeans and the Brazilians and stuff would come, play that the week before as the warm-up basically. But even though they'd put the results, and I have to say, if anyone ever saw the results, oftentimes actually the teams that got caught onliners with no pressure would win these. Rival could win this shit or fucking Tech could win this shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Funny that you mentioned Rival, because there's two prominent curses in old school Counter-Strike. One is the Rival curse. It's, they look amazing. They have amazing West Coast players. They go to the event and they don't even make the top 10. And they have an auto berth to get seeded to where you only have to win one or two games to get into the top 10.
Yes.
So, and then they won the Pre-CPL bootcamp, which is the second curse, which is you win the Pre-CPL bootcamp, you never win the event.
Right.
And I remember Rival won that one tournament. They got knocked out in the first round to the worst team I've ever seen. And then we won. It's funny that you say that, because we won because we beat Esports United, Veslan's team, the one we bootcamped against. We beat them in that event. And Vesslan always complained that, oh yeah, the only reason y'all won is because the event lasted until 2 a.m. I'm like, Counter-Strike's Counter-Strike. You got to shoot people. And they were just tired. Sure. And they said that we fed them Taco Bell, which made their aim worse because it's dog
That's
food.
A great excuse. Okay.
We took them to Taco Bell. They said it was dog food. And to make it up to them, we took them to Olive Garden, which is Olive Garden is, I don't know if you've heard of Olive Garden, but it's just an Italian franchise. It's the McDonald's of Italian. We took them there and they said, oh man, this is 10 steps better than Taco Bell.
Okay.
Yeah. But we won the Pre-CPL bootcamp, and that's the event, the last event we played in 2003. So we didn't win the event there, but famously we lost to X3. We lost to them, or 3D, or whoever. I think it was X3 or 3D at the time. 3D at the time. We lost to them on Train, which is our worst map. We were just never good on Train. I wish we could ban maps like that. That's the bane of our existence, is playing Train, and you would just play random things. And all Vesslan always complained about I don't like this table. I don't like this chair. Oh, this computer sucks. They would always complain about it because I guess, I don't know if Europeans are just used to getting better setups going to wherever they're at. But yeah, that boot camp we had with vesslan with them and Rival was hilarious, because Rival was sitting behind us, we were in the middle, and Esports United was in front of us, and we would just rotate through playing games, and we would just talk smack to each other. The funny thing is Notorious was on their team, so every time we would kill Notorious, we would just echo the song Notorious B.I.G. We would just be like, nah, nah, Notorious. We would just say that every time, and we'd crack them up. And even better is, like, whenever they would rush, I'm like, okay, like, it'd be real quiet. They wait down in time, like 1 minute. I'm like, I don't know where they're at. I'm like, let's shift around, kind of look for information. I'm like, hold on, let's wait and see if we hear Swedish. They're talking Swedish. They're gonna rush. Get ready, guys.
That was the tell.
That was the tell. They're talking Swedish. Yeah.
By the way, were you actually one of the people? Did you actually try to? I mean, it sounds like you were. Like I said about some of the other group who were a bit elated. Were you trying to be like friendly and sort of like get to know the other people from other countries and get to know the international vibe? Was that something you were into back then?
Yeah, I mean, we were. I mean, RS was always super friendly. We always wanted to talk to the other teams. We always wanted to play them. That was a big thing. Like, I want to play them. I want to see how they play.
Right.
That's like the big thing, because I mean, you didn't really get to scrim a bunch of Europeans unless they came and they played in the BYOC, because they were always either in their hotel room or doing something. But we were just really friendly. We were friends with, like, I mean, remember the first event, we would just chill with the MTW guys, Kraken. Like, it was freaking, there was, at the time, it was a straight German team. I remember them because they had a player named Scorp on their team, and he sat closer to his monitor than Yukindar. Like, I'm talking, This guy's face was in the monitor. And back then we didn't have 144 hertz monitors. We had like 60 hertz monitors. I'm like, you're going to go blind. Like, he just sat really close. But I remember, because we would always, whenever we played them on land, kind of to warm up and stuff, we would scream Scheiße. We would always scream like just German stuff at them. And Kraken would make fun of us because he would always come up to us and try to do an American accent. And his American accent was basically John Wayne. He would come up to us and be like, I can talk like an American. Like, he would always do stuff like that. But like, yeah, I mean, we were always friends with them. I mean, even with vesslan and stuff, like, it was cool because we would always just chat about strats and like what to do and how things are and stuff. We were always really friendly. RS was never like, don't talk to us. We would always talk to people. And that's just who we were. None of the guys were really geeks, right? Like, none of them, all of them we were just regular dudes. We all had like girlfriends. We would go to events, and we would always say, you need to hit your quota, which is 20 kills. And after 20 kills, go to the movies with your girlfriend or something, right? That was kind of the thing. We were all just laid back. We were friends with everybody.
By the way, this might shock people, but I'm going to guess there was no salary in this team, right?
No salary at all. I mean, the best thing we got is we got free hardware. Laurent had a LAN center inside of a comic book shop called LAN Madness. He would just let us use the LAN center. We'd just play there for free, and then we could use any of the computers that he had. Like, so somebody needed parts, he could get them. We would get headphones. Plantronics did send us like headsets and stuff at some time, but we just never got any money. We would just go to we would make money to like pay for hotel rooms and go to events by winning like Tango Lands, where it was like first place was like $500, and we win like 2 of those, or we'd go to another Killer Land or something like that, and we would go. But like, we would pay our own way for most things. Our dream was to basically save our money from all these Tango Lands, these $500, and to buy tickets to go to a European land. That was our thing. We wanted an account. We had a credit card for the team, a Riot Squad credit card, and we had the RS house, which Laurent basically was Laurent's house, and we could play there. And we wanted to make it to a European event, which we didn't ultimately, but we live our lives through Electric because he did, at least.
Yeah, if people don't know, I think the analogy I would give is, if anyone knows the classic 90s poker movie Rounders, that's what it was like to be in these teams. If you had a local land scene, you just go and you pick up like a 500, 1,000 there by playing these small lands where it's either like other Cal invite people, it's mixed teams, right? It's people that you can beat. And so people don't know, we're just talking about the big CPLs where you might play, 4 or 5 or something.
Yeah.
You've probably played like 200 lands or something if we're talking about local lands, right?
Tango was the biggest one. Tango Land was the biggest one. They would hold it like almost monthly. And I would kid Tango Land, Lethal Gamers, Killer Land, all those things. There'd be a bunch we would drive to lands. I drove to a land in St. Louis when I left RS. I was in PAG. PAG drove up to St. Louis. It was like a crazy drive. And we ended up playing RS in the finals there. They had Immortal and they had Fatality on that team. We wrecked them or whatever. But we went up to New York. We won a WCG qualifier here and we went up to New York. But yeah, I mean, we drove to Louisiana. We played in a Counter-Strike tournament in Louisiana to win an auto berth, and then we joined an Unreal tournament with the CS team and got second place. We defeated the first and number 1 OGL team and number 2 OGL team in the tournament, but we lost in the finals because they just knew like an exploit we didn't know about. was insta-give, capture the flag, which was fine for us because, we played Quake, so it wasn't too hard. But yeah, I mean, we just played tons of LANs, tons of local LANs. That's why Texas was amazing. That's why I think it helps a lot of the players, a lot of the good players from Texas. They just got all their experience on LAN. There was a lot of raging too. The LANs, you saw a lot of people rage. I remember a lot of things. I mean, I got banned from one of the Tango LANs. I got banned from a Tango LAN and couldn't play with my team at the CPL qualifier because I hit a player from Tau in the face with a keyboard. So it got heated.
Thing is, though, that's another thing people wouldn't realize, because it wasn't like professional. It was like very much like an amateur hobby type thing back then. Dude, there was loads of people having like fights after tournaments and people getting punched and stuff. Yeah, it was kind of crazy, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was just nothing. You were playing because you competed. You really wanted to win. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, ultimately, like when I had like retired and stopped playing, it was just because I had to go to school. I had to finish college. I couldn't keep dropping classes. I had a girlfriend. I had to, my parents were putting pressure on me to do things, and there was just no money in it. I mean, I think Dustin alluded to it too. It's like, you're not getting a salary. If you go to the tournaments, you literally have to place top 3. And even if you get third place, you're getting 10 grand. If you're getting first place, you're getting 50, unless you go to like one of those good tournaments, like, CPL Winter was like 100 or something, or I can't remember like how much it was, but there wasn't as much prize money. We kind of paved the way for everybody today because it's like way more money, right? You've got stickers, you've got tournament money, you've got salaries and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, motivation was a big deal for people because it's like, we need to get a sponsor, we need a LAN center, we need to play on a team. It's hard to stay motivated unless you really want it to win. You play for the love of the game. That's what they said, for the love of the game.
By the way, since you left like the official like pro part of CS so early, I was actually surprised when I got in contact with you again that you would follow CS now. Was there a big gap in the middle where you never followed it? Did you always keep your eye in? What was that like?
I watched a little bit. Like I watched through basically the Complexity days with Fraud, kind of because, Rambo kind of stayed in the scene. I mean, I just watched Rambo and Rambo and Electric, basically, just because I knew them. I watched them. I like Counter-Strike. I mean, to this day, I play CSGO, CS2. I stopped from Source until Go, and then I started in Go and started playing in Go again, just for fun and with friends. But I just like watching it. Like I like watching, even when I play today, it's just fun when you play a team and you just need to figure out where the gaps are. You need to figure out where people need to go. I mean, obviously the aim is I'm washed, but it's fun. It's fun to watch. When I took my kids to watch, the Stewie IEM, like, it was insane. Like the vibe in that arena when you watched it, when Stewie was there, like, I had to tell my kids kind of the story and how it goes. But like, they had other tournaments there, like Overwatch, and like, they just weren't interested in those games. I took them to, my son plays in a team, the Frisco Falcons for XP League. They plays in a team, and we went to that event to watch the Overwatch team because that's what he plays. And he got bored because aesthetically, it's just a hard game to watch.
Oh, for sure.
It's just not very fun. And I took him to the Counter-Strike game, and like in the middle of the game where D2 basically ties it up and goes to overtime, my son's like, I don't know what's happening, but like, this is amazing. Like, this is amazing. And it's just a fun game to watch. It's like, my guilty play. I watch it like somebody would watch basketball, right? So I've kind of kept up with kind of the modern CS because it's just, I like doing it. I like watching it.
It must also have an extra appeal for you because, like, look, there's a lot of casual people can enjoy it, but you obviously have the grounding in the game. And I always tell people, it's actually, I often compare it to basketball because, look, even if the rules change, people can do different things. There are certain concepts like a pick and roll that will always exist in basketball. It just fundamentally works with how the game works. So it's the same in Counter-Strike. There's certain concepts of how you hold angles or you play off each other. They're just evergreen, right? They still exist from your day to today.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things. I mean, they still on Inferno they call it banana. I mean, that was we tabbed it in our game when we played. We called it banana. I mean, I don't think we made it up, but in 1.6, everybody was calling it banana. I mean, if Prodigy was still played today, there was a room called the CK3 room. Yes. Which the reason we called it that is when we played CK3 for the first time, they had 3 guys in there. The second you walked in, it would be like a Kevlar fireworks show. They would just headshot you, and we just called it the CK3 room, right? And they were very slow at playing Counter-Strike, so we would call it. And then obviously you've got the Moto box and things like that. So a lot of the things are kind of shared from today, a lot of the strategies and stuff. The only difference obviously is no skyboxes. Nobody ever lined up grenades. Like there was no lining up of grenades. There was no Molotov, which has kind of changed things quite a bit in the pace of Counter-Strike and stuff. So, and there were no set roles. Like a lot of the roles people, you've got your entry, you've got your lurk and your primary opper and stuff. That stuff didn't exist then. So a lot of the things have changed, but watching it, you kind of say like, oh man, they're so, like my son's like, how are they so good? And I'm just like, yeah, I mean, they practice, they play a lot, they've got a lot of aim. And you forget, like, you were that good at some point in time. Like, when I played early on, you always say, like, how's this person that good? I'm like, well, just practice. You just played. It just came naturally to you. You're just good because that's the way the cards fell. But a lot of the stuff's the same. But it's interesting because I see my son watch it and stuff, and he's just like, oh, that's amazing. And obviously, when I watch it, I'm like, that's really hard to do. Like, just that's not easy. That's not easy.
Are you someone like, I know a lot of people, if they came from the era when there wasn't the salaries and there wasn't much money to be made, some people actually feel either like, some of them are bitter, some people just do the what if, if I'd have waited 5 years, maybe I could have had like a career, maybe like you say, no one had led the path yet, there wasn't this money to be made. Yeah. How do you look back on it? Do you look back fondly? Do you sort of wish you were 10 years younger or something? What's your take on esports?
I never envisioned it as like a career. So like, I don't look back and wish. The only regrets I had maybe is getting kicked for being toxic from PAG before that 2001 Winter CPL. And then I have to join X3 because there were no teams like that I could join that I could play with. And that was like the best I was playing Counter-Strike was in PAG. They kicked me from that team. I had the opportunity to join the RS team that went to WCG where it was Immortal, Warsaw, Trig, and a couple of other players where LNG won that World Cyber Games. I had an opportunity. They told me to go, but I didn't have a passport, so I couldn't go to that event. So then I was just like, okay, I have to find a team to join. Ronald said,
I see what you mean. So there's a couple of times you sort of zigged when you should have zagged, and you could have had like a better opportunity.
And that's where like the regret is. One is I don't regret like not like winning a tournament or something. I regret being an asshole to my team and getting kicked because like when PAG went to that tournament, they got knocked out in the first round. Yes. So it was just like So like I regret those things, but I never envisioned it as a career. The only thing like I kind of just look back on, I'm like, damn, I wish Twitch was out because like I would have been streaming.
Oh, your style would have been super popular, mate. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody in RS had like a good attitude. They were just friendly to be around. They weren't like, usually when you meet a top player, like they're not very talkative. They're not the best streamers. They never turn into the best streamers, right?
Oh, no, by the way, the reason your team would have been good is when I used to watch those POVs, I always told people, the European ones, everyone used voice comms and they spoke Swedish or German anyway. Obviously, everyone in your team recorded with the in-game voice thing, and that was half the enjoyment of watching the VOD. People just joking around, saying stupid shit, complaining. Yeah. That was like part of the banter, Yeah,
and I think, that's the only thing. I'm just like, man, if Twitch was out earlier, we would be streaming. Yeah. We all had like pretty personalities. We could probably make it as a streamer and stuff, but that's kind of the only thing. We were just early. Like I said, we're like the Will Chamberlains. We were like there before TV was there to kind of show you how good players were. But obviously people get better, kids get younger, and you start seeing, Donk, right? Sure. You see Donk, and then you see like, other people aging out that were used to be good and stuff. So the Counter-Strike's way better. People are just way better now than we ever were at some point, just strictly because they saw us or they saw a version of us at some point and, they got better.
Thing is, though, one thing I'll say that is cool about your era, though, is unironically, once esports gets big enough, and actually since Counter-Strike still endures as a game, some of these names have like extra value than if they were in like Quake or something. You did play like the best players of all time, and even some of the fuckers like Fatality, like that. That is like having played with Wilt Chamberlain or something. Like, not many people have that story, so it's kind of cool in esports you have these stories, right?
Yeah, I tell people we live in a time where Tiger Woods, Roger Federer, like all these people, and then you've got Fatality, and you've got all these teams, like all the best. We got to see the best of the best, like in our era. So it's fun kind of to go back and reminisce because I talk to people all the time who are from the old school time, and we kind of reminisce about all the different lands we went to and the things we did. I always tell people like going to an event back in the day, like a phrase I would always use with iSalmon is like I felt like I was battling the game engine and my computer more than I was the other team. Right. Like I didn't care who I played, but I was just like, I had to make sure the settings were right. Cause back then, like there was no raw mouse input. You had to install a config file to remove mouse
measure it,
from
all
Windows.
That shit. Yeah, sure.
There was no 100,000 polling rate. Yep. There was no 144 hertz monitor. You played on like a CRT, which went up to like 100. You played on ballroom tables that had nails in them with cloth laid over the top. You didn't have, secret lab chairs. You played on these old carpeted ballroom chairs. And no matter where you went, you were playing on, the computers were all right, but you had to deal with like somebody installed Logitech software. You need to uninstall it. We had a lot, and we had ball mice. Like early on, people forget we played on ball mice. So before we started a game, we opened the mouse up, we cleaned the lint roller, we had alcohol and everything to remove the lint and stuff. And we didn't have like all these mouse pads that everybody had. We had rat pads, which was just a hard pad and a funk pad. We had like 3 mouse pads. We had the super mat, which was basically a huge cloth pad that wasn't even supposed to be a mouse pad. You have you're supposed to use it to put your printer on top of it or something like that.
I always thought Fatality low key, mate, that was genius. You took a cheap like Walmart printer pad and you made kids go, "Oh my god, for $25 I get." And I told them that's actually the most genius like snake oil sale of all time.
Yeah, so it's just like you didn't have practice rooms. When you went to the event, you had like 15 minutes to set everything up, get everything ready.
There was no practice PC.
Play.
Yeah, if you didn't have a BYOC, you were shit out of luck. Yeah.
And there were tons of games where I'm like, I don't think mouse excels off and I have to play.
Right.
I don't think, my hertz aren't right. Like we just have to go. Like when I subbed in for Rambo and X3 for one game, it was because he had a problem with his mouse where it wasn't like something was wrong with the sensor or something and he couldn't play and he couldn't find somebody who had another one because we're all kids and we're all cheap. Right. And there was no mouse that he had with the same stuff. So, I mean, we had to fight a lot of things. These kids now don't have to do that. I mean, we don't get practice rooms. They get amazing computers. Like they complain about the computers at a tournament. They replace the computers at the tournament.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't happen.
No, it's wild.
That didn't happen. So we had a lot of things and like no map pool. That was like another thing too. So,
by the way, one thing you're making me remember that even I'd forgotten was because in this era, especially we were talking about the era even before there was Team 3D, which was the first sponsored team, when there was no sponsored teams, like you said about Rambo, bro, even top players might not have like 100 FPS. They might have like some janky setup, like you're saying, like they have to play on like the smallest resolution with the worst graphics and all the smoke. This is true. Even professional players wouldn't have this, right?
Yeah, he was nerfed. I mean, when we had BYOC lands, Rambo was nerfed. He was playing like probably at like 80% capacity because back then when you had a crappy computer, when we moved to like 1.6, from a stationary crosshair to the new crosshair that kind of expanded and moved, it would expand and move more slowly if you had low FPS, right? And then the recoil would be different. So, one of the things is like CK3 would always dangle the carrot to Ronald because like they're like, we'll give you a computer. We'll help pay for your internet. Just join us, right? That was like a big thing because CK3 at the time, kind of before the younger guys, they had Big V and Thorin and all these older people. They all had jobs. They all worked at Dell. They had back then, they had experimental video cards that were from the Dell, from the Dell labs that they would just toss or something. And they had really good computers and they had really good internet. And the joke was like, we would always lose to them online. We made it to all the finals we would go to, like RITD, which was 7-on-7, no friendly fire. We made it to the finals there and our first iteration of the league. Like RS just came out of nowhere and we played them and they had a guy with 18 ping. Back then, like 18 ping was like, you're playing on the server if you have 18 ping. So like hardware was a huge deal, especially for online. Online, it was like, if you didn't have a good computer, you didn't have good internet, you just weren't going to get good results. So we were always trash online. But then when we got to the tournaments, we could play on, computers that were better than ours. And it would just be much better. But yeah, you were always fighting the hardware and the environment more than the other people.
Another thing you mentioned that a lot of people don't know, because I always tell people the same story. I'm like a veteran now because I've done this like 23 years or something. But when I started, I was 18. And at the time, I was considered like the equivalent of like a 12-year-old kid now. Like you're saying, because PC gaming was an expensive hobby. Like the internet costs money, especially DSL. Yeah. Fucking the PC cost like $2,000 back then. Like even back then, and by the way, $2,000 was a lot more money back then than it is now. Like it was so cost prohibitive. I was like one of the rare younger guys actually. Like you say, I would have said the average age of a CS player was like 26 or something, mate. Like you had to have a job and a life. And so in your case, you were one of the younger guys, right? I think I even remember BigDog even saying back in the day, it was someone like you, it was you guys were like the young crew who at the CPLs or whatever, you'd be like running around the BYOC at night while all these guys are fucking off in bed or whatever, right?
Yeah, we didn't have a hotel room. So at the first few CPLs, we didn't get a hotel room. We would sleep underneath the table in the BYOC. But we would just bring our pillows and stuff and we would sleep them. And one infamous thing we did is we all brought like cereal and a bunch of food. So when everybody was asleep, we would have a food fight at night. And then when the organizers would come over in the morning, there'd be like cereals and all sorts of stuff laying all over the floor because we were kids. Like we literally were kids. We would the only computer hardware we would get, like our parents would give us some stuff. And the only good computer hardware we would get is in the earlier CPLs. They would give away like Logitech Wingman mice. They would give away GeForce cards and stuff, or you would win them by winning the tournament. So like in the earlier iterations of the CPL, we won all the tournaments because they had a 5v5, a 3v3, a 1v1 off. We would win all of those. And when you would win them, you would win a Sound Blaster Live card, or you would win a TNT Ultra or something like that. And we would use those to help us play. And that's just basically what it is. And it helped that we were in our parents were like not like super well off, but like well enough to where they can buy us computers, right? They would buy us computers and things of that nature. So we were a bit lucky in that area, and our internet was getting better in the area, way better than other areas because we had DSL earlier than other places too. So yeah.
By the way, let me ask you a few old questions, as you seem to have a pretty good memory. Like, I'll tell you one, which is because of the way name value works. I'll give you the analogy first before I give you the question, right, which goes like this. So when you had the famous combos of Ksharp and Rambo and Heaton and Potty, if people don't know, I actually always thought that Potty was better than Heaton. It's just Heaton had he had the style, the spray style. He was this fucking bombastic character. He did the 1v5, so he kind of just got the marketing right. Now, he's a mega player, but I always thought Potty was the better player. I always thought it was the same thing with Ksharp and Rambo. Ksharp, I can tell you, by the way, I even saw lots of his like private demos. I was a friend of his. He had unbelievable skill, mate. He might have been like the fucking best player, skilled-wise, but I always thought Rambo was the better player. Like, if you put Rambo in a match, he's a killer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, the analogy, like, I was actually thinking about that when you said it, make an analogy. Like, Ksharp is like LeBron James, and Rambo would be like Kobe. So, like, the difference is Kobe just, the Mamba, man, he is a killer. Like, he will... If you're his best friend and you're on the opposite team, he would probably clock you to win. Yeah. And that's kind of like Rambo. Rambo was very like focused. He wanted to win. He wanted to do anything they could win. Practice like crazy. Did as much as he could. And then Ksharp, he's just nice. Like, you know, LeBron James obviously is awesome too, but he doesn't have that Mamba mentality, right? That's the thing when they compare him to Jordan. Yes. Jordan just had that killer mentality. Like, who did Jordan dunk on? Everyone. Jordan dunked on everyone. It didn't matter who you were. So, I mean, that's kind of the analogy that I would give is Kyle was, like I said, he was nice, super nice. There was a match where he sat and made excuses to the team when Pag was playing X3 so that we could win. Like, literally, that's how nice he was. That was so nice. That's how nice he was. That's how nice he was. Like, to give us a better chance, right? And I always felt that's the way he played sometimes. I felt like he didn't, like, push himself to... It's kind of like... I think the more recent analogy is like when Apex told Zywoo, like, if you don't play like Zywoo with this major, we're going to lose. Yeah. And I feel like Kyle's kind of the same way. Like, if you're not going to take over, we're going to lose. Like, you have to do it. And that's where, like, you could see him explode on Nip, where that infamous demo on Nip, where he just destroyed people. Like, he needed the push. He wasn't like the natural killer, like the Mamba, but he had all the tools you needed to be the best, right? Yes. When he wanted to focus and be the best, he was the best. And that's the way it was at that time, right? At that time, he was. But Ronald was consistency. He didn't need a push. His push is he wanted to win, and that was it. Like, that's all that mattered.
And then I always ask this question because, unfortunately, since a lot of the really old school X3 players didn't play that much longer, right? BigDog, sadly, is only famous for that Nip game where they smashed his head in with Potty. And I always tell people, one, Potty might have had the best, like, first bullet aim ever, by the way. And then two, this, as you say, the reason that game was actually shocking isn't that BigDog sucked. It's that no one had ever done that to him. He actually was a really fucking good player, right?
Yeah, I remember that tournament. He was playing really well up until, like, the match before and that match. Like, he was playing super well. Like, he's the kind of guy where you don't have to worry about him playing bad. Like, you just never have to worry about him playing bad. He would always just play good whenever he played. But in that tournament, trailing towards the finals, he started to play not as good. And I don't know if it's just because the competition cranked up, the pressure cranked up or whatever, but I mean, he was always super consistent. I mean, it's just Mr. Consistency. He's always going to give you the double-double, right? But at some point he just didn't. And that might have been the difference, right? Like, you just, like I said, if you've never seen anything like that before and you've never experienced your equal because you're just rolling everybody that you play, it's going to be different and things change. I remember they lost that match, right? They needed to like defuse the bomb or something. I remember because it was like Dustin and somebody else had to drop down from the rafters. It was like 2v2 or something like that. I can't remember, but they dropped in from the rafters and defused the bomb and they needed that to like tie the game, but they just rushed it. Like, they just, I got to go do it. I got to do it. And like, that's the difference between, okay, let's not rush it. Like, let's drop and check and do it. And if you've never been put in that situation before, like in high pressure, you can't be expected to kind of compete on the level that you need to. And I'm sure, I mean, Nip, I remember like back then they'd played all sorts of teams that were like amazing back then. Like, all the European teams were amazing. They had all those like old school, like CPL European lands that they had that they probably went to all over the place. So they had just as much LAN experience as, you know, X3 did. They just had more competition, I think, which ultimately I think was the difference. Is they just played and were pushed more often than X3 was. X3 was just, they were head and shoulders above everybody else at the time. There was nobody better.
Who were the players in your era? Who do you think were like underrated people, or they never had like the big pop? I mean, they didn't reach demos or something. Who were the people you always thought were legit?
Oh man, I mean, like players I played with, like Crash, he was kind of a local player that we played with. He was on the same level as Rambo on the earlier Counter-Strikes. I mean, there was a situation, and he would only use MP5. That was like his thing. MP5. Okay. He wouldn't buy armor. He wouldn't buy nades. He would just buy MP5. He'd go out and 2-tap people. They'd die. I remember, back in the day, we were playing CK3 in the finals, and he wasn't saying anything, and we were losing. And I look over at his screen, he had $16,000 in like a match, a finals match. I'm like, why do you have this? And he would never talk. He was like very, very quiet. Right. Never said anything. And I'm looking over. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, he's like, well, I only buy MP5. I'm like, I know you buy MP5, but you have money. Like, buy Ronald an AK. Buy me an op, and let's try to win. Like, I don't understand. And he'd be very quiet, and he would just wreck people. Warsaw was really good on the earlier Counter-Strike days. He was the IGL of RS from kind of inception. Obviously, iSalmon, I feel like iSalmon doesn't get enough credit for like how good he was. He was just incredible aim. He was like, I remember because like when we were talking in the BOIC with like different players, they're like, oh yeah, we're worried about Ash. We're not worried about anybody else. Right. We're worried about Ash, right? So I mean, it's just that's just kind of the way it was. I mean, I didn't think that there were so many like amazing players. There were some players, I can't remember their names on W. I mean, obviously Mikey on Method. Method. Mikey was another player that just like, he was just super solid, super consistent, like very cerebral and very laid back. Like I never saw that guy ever practice, and he just would always just wreck people. Jaguar was another one that like I kind of looked up to, have that kind of just crazy. I liked him because he would just talk smack. Like he reminded me a little bit of myself. He would just say stuff to people. He would talk smack. He'd yell at lands and stuff. And then he would play well. Like he would just play consistent. So yeah, I mean, there were a lot of players. I'm trying to think of like Bombs. I know Bombs was really good. A lot of those West Coast guys, they were all just good. I remember they knocked us out of that tournament. The one that with Lectric and Jaden and them, they beat us in Cobble. And I remember that match because like they waited until like 30 seconds were left on the clock every single round, and then they would rush us and we'd be asleep. Like I would be like, I can't watch this angle any longer.
Oh, it's the most boring map to play on CT ever, isn't it? Yeah, it's so bad.
It would just explode on us. So there was a lot of West Coast guys that probably don't get enough. Mikey probably doesn't get as much credit. Volcano probably doesn't get as much credit. Sunman, he was amazing. There were a lot of amazing players on the teams that we played.
Were you a guy? I mean, it's alluded that you maybe were. Back then, another really weird thing is, I mean, bro, I could tell you some horror stories about CSGO, like some top players that never watched the other team's demos, and they just let their in-game leader and coach do that. And I used to tell these guys, you don't know how much fucking money you're leaving on the table, you idiot. I said, if you looked at any sport like fucking NFL, every wide receiver watches all his routes and all the fucking defensive side. Yeah. Of course, it's just default because, so if you think it's bad now, bro, back in your era, almost no pro. It was actually a thing for fans to watch demos. Did you actually used to try and scout people or watch the opposition? Did you ever put any time into that?
I would watch the demos of other players just to see, like, where is he standing? Where is he going? Right. Like, what's his pathing? And maybe if you can sneak a look at the radar, because the radar never really worked well in like old school demos and stuff. So you couldn't really get any like positioning from people. But then you just kind of looked at like their style and what they did. I didn't really get like super tactical until we played CK3. When we played them, they had strats. Like they had real strats. They would hold spots and angles and stuff. And that's when I was just like, okay, we got to do like CK3 stuff. Like if we're going to win, we got to back our aim up with like some CK3 stuff. And yeah, I mean, watching demos and stuff was like, it's something I did. I don't think anybody else like wasted time with it because everybody's just like, I'm just going to play. Who cares what they're doing? Like, I'm just going to shoot them. That was like the mentality of like, even in like USCS today, like outside of like maybe the top 3 teams, even if you see these other players on other teams, they're just not as committed, right? This is not as committed to do the necessary work. And, I won't say I watched 1,000 demos, but I know I tried to watch demos because a lot of the strats that we had kind of in the Jaden and Grazzle kind of iteration of RS is we would take a strat from a demo I had watched from a professional team. So like we took a strat from Infinity Esports on Nuke where they would just stack a bunch of flashes, one off the wall, one over the box, and with a nade to push them back. And we would just use it. We would drill the strat. We would get the strat. And in the game, I'd be like, IES, let's do the IES strat. Let's go. Another thing we saw, like gamers online on Nuke, they would always go to the hut and they would shoot up to the first spawn would always go to the hut and shoot to the rafters with one bullet. And then everybody would pile through the door. So we'd say, Ash, take the gall shot and we'll follow through the door and the hut outside or something. So we would take strats from other teams like SK and things, and we would just call it. So we did watch the demos and then we would just take the strats. Like I always told Ash, like we wanted to be an American team with a European style. Right. So we just watched European demos. We stole their strats and we would just call them as kind of like our, set default strats. And then we would just go dynamic if none of those were working. We would just have a pocket strat and we would call it.
Because didn't you always think that was like, I always thought as someone who was a journalist as well, one of the most really unfair characterizations of the difference. They do it the same now. They always make it sound like Europe has everything and NA is just inferior. And I always used to tell people, bro, if anything, you're nailing it right now, because I knew people like Moto. I said, what NA doesn't have is they didn't have the team concept, or they didn't have the strats, or they didn't have the roles. Like, if you ever watched, NA had some amazing players. I mean, we talked about some of them. They had players that could have been the best player in the world, maybe were. It's just that for some reason, Americans were a bit more individualistic in CS.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's like the region, right? I feel like European players are just more reserved and they just listen when you tell them things. And US players are just young guns. Like, there were a lot of players back in the day that just thought they were good and they didn't need to listen and they could just outshoot. Right. And they didn't think about CS at the same level as somebody who could compete, which is why you only have like 3 or 4. I mean, even today, you only have like 3 or 4 teams in the US that mean anything, right? Because, some people take it seriously and put in the time and grind when there's nothing, there's no money, there's no incentive, and they do it, and then they get to that point, right? And they're that good. And I just think, I don't know if it's like, the way like the US is structured, like our government's different than their government, Right. I don't know if it, like, you're just raised in a different culture. Obviously there's cultural differences, and I just think the European cultural difference is just, it's different. And the kids here, there's just not as much incentive. But CS died. Like, at some point in the US, CS died. I feel like after Complexity, like when they were in with Fraud, I felt like Counter-Strike died. Like, in Source, there was no, like, I don't even remember anything from that gap, right? And then it kind of started coming back to life, I guess, like later in Go. I don't even think early Go it came to life.
No, but it's mate, here's the difference of your era to the CSGO onwards era is when we're talking about these CPLs and Europeans coming, Europe was the region with like the smaller lands and not as much money, and they came to the CPLs. That was like the major, essentially. Yeah. And so the dynamic you're talking about flipped after the CGS period. Yeah, it became like essentially like it is now, like a European game where the North American guy comes in. Yeah, it's the opposite. Yeah.
That was like another thing. That's how good they were. They would come, they would get jet lagged, they'd get acclimated, and then they would just wreck.
Yes.
I mean, it's just, it was a big deal when 3D had beaten like Gamers Online or whatever in the finals. Like, it was massive. It was like the first time we had just wrecked like so many European teams. Like, we'd won a tournament with Europeans there, right? That was a big deal. Yeah. I mean, it's just, Europe is just a different animal. I mean, even today, it's very heavily like, you can't play good Counter-Strike unless you live in Europe, right? Like, that's where all the competition is.
You alluded to it earlier, but obviously, famously, except for people like 3D, and then later on, maybe like the Zexes, and I know Gamers X went to an ESWC. Yeah, there's a few people got to go to them. Is that, I guess that is one of your few regrets, you didn't get to go to one of the European events and see what that would have been like?
We wanted to. Like, I wish that Jaden and Grazzle team had stayed together, because I felt like we had enough consistency to where we could do some damage. Like, we wanted to play, like, our big thing is we wanted to play SK on Dust. We felt like our Dust was like super good. We would always play like in the bootcamp, we played Esports United on it. I mean, we lost every game, but we'd always play them tight on Dust. But when we played them at the Lethal Gamers LAN, we just destroyed them at there. And we would always play everybody super tight on it. We were just really good at it. And we were hoping we would play them. We would have had to beat WEW at that tournament that we lost at to play them, because the next match was SK. And I felt like if we had played them on Dust or Dust 2, we would definitely have beaten them. But that's just me thinking it, right? I don't know if it's actually true, but I felt like that was our best chance. And we would, like I said, I swear Ronald would just always beat us. We would always lose to X3 or 3D, and they would put us in the losers bracket, and then we would just have to fight our way back up. We'd have to play as many dogs as possible, because everybody didn't want to lose, because it was double elim, no best of double elim, one match. And then you just have to be lucky that if you dropped to the losers bracket, that you were playing a map that you were good on, right? So it was luck of the draw back then.
One thing as well, since you were someone who used the AWP, is another reason why actually a lot of people didn't AWP on LAN, is because, as we're talking about, if you're playing a BO1 with MR12 rules and you like lose the pistol, bro, you're only going to get like 2 or 3 AWPs in the whole game. Like, it's pretty big pressure to buy it in that setting, right? It's not the same as an online game.
Yeah, there's, I mean, obviously back in the day, like, the pistols were not as good as they are in CSGO.
No.
Like, you could win with like, a 5.7. Yes. Like, you could give somebody like Rops a 5.7. He kills 4 people with guns. Like, that did not exist even with the DIG. I mean, the DIG was good because you had one DIG, but it was almost as difficult as the DIG is today, right? Like, it wasn't. But the USP was garbage. I'm trying to remember. They had like 2 other pistols. I can't remember the names of them, but yeah, they were all garbage, right? Like, even the USP was garbage, and now the USP is like, it's pretty good. Like, you could win some rounds if you've got some armor and stuff, but you lose that round, it's like 3-0 immediately, and then you have to win that gun round. I mean, it's almost like it is today, right? Like you lose the pistol, and then you've got to win the next gun round. Otherwise, you're just going to stack rounds, right? That's why it's MR12 is nice for CS2 because it makes the games kind of interesting because anybody could win, right? Like if you win that round, you break the economy, you could turn it, right? Or the pistols are like super lethal. You've got people who are really good at pistol, you could just turn it. You couldn't do that in 1.6. You just couldn't. It wasn't like that at all. And utility use wasn't even close. It wasn't. You couldn't use a molly to push people off of positions, right? And if you drop the smoke, you have to make sure that your computer didn't suck.
Yes,
because if you drop
crash your whole PC,
yeah. And you could know, like, you would know, like, if there was a smoke on the other side of the map because your FPS would drop. You're like, oh, they dropped the smoke somewhere, right? Yes. We had strats back then where we'd be like, okay, we know, like, he has a crappy computer, just drop 3 smokes and then we'll push around it or something, right? So it was a different animal.
One thing you referenced earlier, it's actually something I wish they had more of in CS, which is they did take out a lot of that Quake HL deathmatch type air movement, etc. And you couldn't do, now, even the versions of what people do on the jump maps is like very limited to what you could do before. I always felt like that was a mistake because, like, look, maybe back then it was OP, but I think with how skilled people are now, in a way, the dodging element would be brilliant now. Like, I almost wish that was still in the game. You know what I mean? I bet if you boot up CS2 now, it does feel a lot slower as a game, right, than the version you were playing back
running in the mud.
Yeah.
I mean, even from Go, I felt like was a little bit faster because the air movement was faster because you would see people kind of strafe jump around corners and stuff after they take a shot with the op or something. But like Counter-Strike and 5.2, it was like you could play in a pub, you could strafe jump from your spawn to the enemy spawn. And if you're playing scrubs, you would literally be on like almost to the entrance of their spawn before they're done buying guns. I would buy guns like that and I would go and I would kill them. And back then you have to buy ammo individually. It didn't come in the gun, right? You have to literally buy the individual ammo. So you could, the save rounds were quite different then. It's like, okay, fine, I'll buy a Colt. I'll buy one clip, right? I'll buy one clip or something like that. So yeah, the strafe jumping is like way different. And plus the counter strafing wasn't like as big a deal back then, right? Counter strafing is huge now. You literally have to be dead still, or you have to counter strike perfectly to shoot the op accurately, or the deagle or something like that. Back then, you're strafing like Quake. You're sliding into the shot, right? And you're killing people. Or you've got back then you had a gun called the TMP, or you had like a MP5 and you would just strafe jump, strafe into it and ding, 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 ding. You'd kill like a bunch of people and you'd keep going, right? And that's probably why like Chameleon, he hates it. Like they changed it to like a slower game, but I didn't hate it. I felt like it made the game better. It made it more tactical, probably.
One thing you mentioned earlier that I can heavily relate to is one of the jokes of my career is actually the game now I am most associated with is Counter-Strike because I was there the whole time. But I always tell people I have almost the same story as you, mate. I used to play Quake and go to LANs and I literally had the same story. Someone came in and what would happen famously at the LANs I went to, like a local one, is if you played Quake online and the other guy just plays for fun on the weekend, you're too good. So what happens is when you beat them a million times, they go, oh, this is unfair because you guys play the game. So let's play something none of us have played because they think it's going to like reset the field as it were. Now look, that didn't work because spoiler, even if you install all these Half-Life mods, like, I'm just going to get good at it because I play the game load. But I get them, like it gave them a moment where they felt like they could compete. And so famously, I remember someone bringing out Counter-Strike and we played it. And no joke, I can even vividly remember like, running like Quake and then some dickhead like with an MP5 behind a box, like the actual stereotype of a noob shooting me in the back. And I remember going, this game's fucking shit. Why are we playing this? And then the joke is like, the rest's history. And then like 23 years later, I'm here still now, right? Did you also have a similar vibe? Because if you came from Quake, like actually early on, CS was a bit like, isn't this little bit for noobs and can't people camp a bit? So is it kind of wild that you actually put that many years in? That must be a bit surreal that like CS is your game.
It is. It was a lot. It was slower than Quake, obviously different. The guns were completely different. And I felt like they made 1.6 to like narrow the gap, right? To narrow the gap between like the people who didn't know how to play and the people who knew how to play. They added some randomness to it. I felt like that's what they did to make it more playable on the release version versus like we would just come from Quake and we could just strafe jump everywhere with the op and then quick zoom people, right? And it was in the beginning, like I said, we uninstalled it after version 3. I just didn't like it. It's just like playing COD after playing like Overwatch or something. It just was so foreign. But then like somebody downloaded it again after a few updates. Everybody started playing it. Everybody got bored of Quake, and we just played it. I don't remember how it like got disseminated amongst everybody, but everybody just ended up playing it, and it was just fun. Like we would LAN it. We'd go to somebody's house with a couple computers, and we would just play. But I mean, the pace is just completely different. Quake had like a weird kind of skill gap. Like you could be as good as you were within your LAN group, and you went to another LAN group, and there was just another level. Like if they were just better, they were just significantly better. I remember Frag 4, like Rambo was amazing. We thought he was the best Quake player, but we went to Frag 4 and he played Machiavelli on LAN. Like I'm like, oh, he wants to play and see how good he is, and he beat Rambo to negatives. Like I was just like, Quake had a like insane skill gap between like the best and like the middle or something, or even in the top 10. It was insane how different it was. So yeah, Counter-Strike, they did dumb it down a little bit, but I felt like making it more accessible brought in more players. It made things more interesting.
The funny thing is that when you were talking through all those issues, which often I have to mention as trivia myself, like the fact that it was a set map for a set round of the bracket, like you say, it was BO1. By the way, the seedings were wonky as fuck because they're doing things trying to...
And there were auto bursts.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out like...
Some teams got auto bursts.
Like the worst ones always was like you say, they'd give someone who did well in Cal but were onliners like a good seed. And then you'd have some like brand new team from Europe that split apart before, so they don't have any history, and they're getting like the 23rd seed. So like that means if people don't follow that, you're going to think that that's good for the NA team. No, that actually means you could be like the 7th seed and you might just get drawn against some like killer team that no one knows is secretly mega because how the bracket works, and then that's one life gone. And that because if I think of all the problems, the number one thing, if I could go back in a time machine, we should have changed is it should have just been a set map pool like we have now, like 6-7 maps. Only the real ones. Get out Aztec, get out Prodigy, just all the real maps everyone knows. That would have made those events better, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. If you could prepare, like I don't think they gave you the map pool.
No, I don't think so.
The seating was until close to the event, like so close to the event that you couldn't really prepare for it with any amount of time. And like scrimming wasn't like in IRC you could go to Find Scrim or SoPug or something like that, and you can get scrims and stuff. But like you didn't know what map you were playing. You just played. You just like, whoever wants to play. We looked 5v5 Central. Like who wants to play, and then you would play. So I think if there was a bit more organization to it, we could have better prepared for things. I mean, if they could vote ban maps, I would have perma-banned Train. I didn't mind playing Prodigy. I just don't want to play Train. It's just, but yeah, I mean, there's just no consistency back then. It was just, like I said, luck of the draw. You would go to the tournament. You would have to either have you would get an auto berth, right? Like either you would get invited, right? Like you would say, okay, like X3 would always get like number 1 seed berth or something. Or you would have to go to a pre-qual LAN. So RS would always go to the LANs. We'd win the qualifier, and then we would get seeded. And then back then you had I think it was 64 teams all the way up to 128 teams. That's how big some of the CPLs were. And then it was just like a bunch of random teams and a bunch of the top 10 teams. And then they would seed everybody, and you would just pray that you weren't on the same side of the bracket as like X3 or something, so that you could win a couple matches, get warmed up by the time you played them. I think that's just kind of the way it is. You just hope that you weren't seated in like the doom side of the bracket, because you only had 2 chances. That's it. You play bad, your mouse doesn't work right, you get set up on a crappy computer. The margins were so thin back then. Everything had to go right for you to just do well and to play well.
Right, obviously it was cool. We went down all memory lane, a lot of different aspects. At the end of this interview, do you have like a message for people? Do you have anyone you want to thank or shout out if they're watching?
No, I mean, Counter-Strike, is a big part. I say it's a big part of my life because I played it for so long. Everybody I met is through Counter-Strike. I mean, I don't really have anything other than just, for my kids, I always tell them, don't be toxic, listen to who's telling you what to do, practice, play hard, don't think you're better than somebody else. Because when I grew up, it was just talking smack, thinking I was better than everybody else. And then ultimately at some point you get kicked from a team, and then you learn, okay, you can't do any of that crap, right? I just say, just don't be toxic, and, try to be friends with everybody and learn as much as you can, because it's a small window. It's not like you think it's going to last forever, right? Not everybody's Forest. Not everybody's Forest where you can just play for 20 years through 5 versions of Counter-Strike or something. So yeah, it's a small window, and you just have to enjoy it as much as you can.
Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Haju, Mac Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers, find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are? Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.